patriarch Abraham gave the tenth of the spoils. So it's a very simple verse, and it starts off with now consider how great this man was. So, in our perspective, or what would you we consider a great man to be? Someone that does a lot of accomplishments, someone that does a lot of different, maybe an invention or anything like that. For example, people can say that Albert Einstein was a great man because what he did. Tesla was a great man for what he did. Edison, so there's a lot of people throughout history. Caesar, and then Napoleon. So there's a lot of history and a lot of different characteristics, different people that did great things that could be considered, a great man. But in this sense, how it says that even Abraham gave the tenth of the spoils. So, in other in other words, he was considered a great man, but not just by anyone. It was by Abraham, and Abraham we know is the father of faith. So he must have done a lot of great things in order for even Abraham to be able to give him the tenth of the spoils. And so what I want to lead up to is what can we do, or what are we doing to be considered a great man? Are we when we socialize, are we having good interactions, or are we just standing there and no one's really giving us any like attention, you can kind of say? Are we someone that brings the some sort of what would you call it, a weight to conversation when we talk and interact, or even at work, if you are like that employee that people kind of rely on, you can say dependable, and not in a way that like, oh, this guy is just trying to work his way to the top or something like that, but no, but in a respectful way with like integrity and being someone that's reliable and dependable, even though sometimes especially with work we can see how sometimes that could backfire on us. Because if we become really reliable and dependable, then at the end, with work, they just start throwing everything at us because they know that we're reliable and dependable. So, but I think with those kind of circumstances, we need to be, like it says here, consider to be a great man, be able to understand, be able to interpret that environment, and be able to work a way around it. Once you start seeing that maybe your dependability and reliability is becoming more of a, for someone else, more of someone to take advantage of, then understand and read the room, as they say, and back up or talk to the individual, and be able to work your way around it. That's in a sense I think is be considered to be a great man, in the sense that you're able to understand the situation, but not just because you're not doing anything, but because you're actually being someone with integrity and doing something good, not just because other people are telling you or anything like that, but because of your own willpower. Also another thing is maybe with with worth ethic, and we can put that into work, working regular jobs, how is your work ethic? Are you a lazy person? Are you not a lazy person? Because, everybody knows someone at work or someone at school that is lazy, and when they say, oh, for example, I always like to give examples at work, where they have the maintenance crew, and just usually everybody does their job, but there's this one guy who is really lazy, always shows up late, does the bare minimum. So he's kind of like it's kind of sad, but he's kind of like the joke. Like if there's something busy, I always tell him like, hey, well, tell this guy to do it. And they're like, nah, that guy, like really unreliable. Like, oh, if there's something that's like one time, I guess something like broke down and they needed like all hands on deck type of thing. And then I was like, oh, well, at least you guys got David. Exposing his name, David, huh? but it's not from here. It's from work. Sorry, man, if you hear this, but it's true. Like, hey, tell him, and then everyone's kind of like, like that guy, nah, like, he's, like, sadly enough, but, no one takes him serious. And I've talked to him, he's an older guy, he's, like, in his, like, I think early 40s. And I've talked to him, like, one-on-one, like, hey, man, you should, like, did you know, like, this, how kind of people view you and stuff? And he doesn't really care, he doesn't really have much of a, like, whatever, it's kind of, as long as I get paid and do what I do outside of work, I don't really care what anybody says. So it's a very sad mentality because, in the long run, well, no one takes him serious. It's sad. No one, he's a joke, sadly enough. That's how people see him. And, like it's going back, in the long run, and no one relies on him, no one depends on him. And knowing that he's also a father and stuff like that, it's kind of like, oh, man, like, this individual has kids, like, the reliability and dependability is probably not the best, unfortunately. And you don't want to be in that position where people see you kind of as a joke. As you're definitely not going to see you as like a great man. And like I said, it could be interpreted in many different ways. A great man. But I'm going based off the sense of how the scripture says with Abraham being the father of the faith, and even Abraham considered him to be a great man and giving him tenths of the spoils. So this individual was really putting in work, as you can say, working hard, and since got the approval, you can kind of say of Abraham, you must have really been doing the best of his abilities. Kind of like with us, we have to do the best we can to move forward, push forward. I know a lot of times when we come to a lot of like churches and youth events and camps and things like that, we kind of always think about the repetitiveness of it. Oh, we're going to hear another message, or we're going to hear something probably we've heard before. But the point is that we're always trying to, especially when like they talk to me and tell me, oh, what are you going to mention or what are you going to say? Like the last camp that we had, Pastor Castro was like, hey, what are you going to talk about, or talk about this. So there's always some sort of preparation, when not just like me, but with other ministers and pastors talk. There's always some sort of preparation to get into like what we're going to talk about. And what I'm trying to get at is like we try to be able to motivate you, try to give you guys a better perspective and understanding of not just the word or what the prophets did, or all the stories, but just also like in integrating it into life, work, school. There's a lot of things that maybe the adults now used to do back then that are very different from now. Technology, a lot of stuff has changed. A lot of ways of communicating and things like that have changed. So being able to like maybe understand a little bit more how stuff has changed, being able to use the Bible and implement it and give off a message, And pretty much what we try to do, or what always help, is try to make all you guys be a great person. Be even though, like I said, it could be. I'm not saying we're going to be perfect, because none of us are. None of us are perfect. A lot of us have a lot of faults. We sin on the daily. We have, there's a lot of stuff that we need to work on. But that's more like in an individual sense. But how do people perceive us? Because not everybody is going to know all of our downfalls, all of our insecurities or things like that. Not everyone's going to know. Maybe only a certain few, and yourself. But like, how does like people outside view you in general? Like I had mentioned here before, like how sometimes at work that I talk to a lot of people, and some like it was funny because I was talking to this lady, and she was like, "Oh, well, how's your family and your kids?" I was like, "I don't got family and kids. Like, why would I? Why would you say that? Yeah, I have family and kids." And they're kind of like, "Oh, I don't know, just the way you communicate, the way you talk, it kind of looks like you have family and kids." And I was like, "Well, I don't have family and kids," But it's just like the way they perceive you. They're gonna notice that there's a difference. Like, oh, this guy seems a little bit mature and things like that, And when you talk to them, they'll take you more serious. They'll take your word when you're actually. Because I've seen it many times where, like, someone knows and understands something, but because of like their history of how they are and how they act and how they behave, when they try to explain something that they actually know and they actually understand, general people don't really take them serious, and they kind of just laugh at him, even though this person is actually telling the truth or explaining something that is correctly, but just because of his like kind of, you can say, past or history of how he is, that one chance, that one opportunity that he has to share his like something that he's knowledgeable about, well, no one's going to take him serious because of how he is in general, And I feel like that's also an important thing, that we should always try to perceive ourselves as I'm not saying we're going to be all serious all the time and things like that, because obviously me, I like to joke around all the time, but like I said, it goes back to understanding and reading the environment, reading the room, as when you have the opportunity to explain something, when to be taken serious. And I think all these things come with experience and with time, and obviously me telling you guys about it, so hopefully that's something that can click in your guys' heads, and being able to understand, read. Maybe I don't want to go all like psychological and read people and body language and all this, but for the most part, that does help a lot. Especially as you get older, it does help a lot when maybe you shouldn't say something, or maybe it's not the right time to say something, or sometimes when there's a comment that wants to be said, but kind of like, maybe should I say this comment or should I not, or is this comment gonna create a conflict at that moment? Being able to understand how the room is and people are, because people are very different. especially like I said, you might how you perceive someone in like with general with everybody, but then we all know each other a little bit deeper with like certain relationships. So and then you start. I mean, if you want to get a little bit more technical, like when you're with someone, like for example, I mean, try not to mention names, but I have a friend, and there was he's gotten better at it, way better at it. But there was a time where we would go anywhere when we were traveling or do something. It would be a certain time, which was 3 o'clock, and he had to eat at that time. It was like mandatory. And sometimes, if we were traveling or something, it's 3 o'clock and we're on the road, and we're like, well, once we get to the next stop, we'll eat something. But once it hit 3, he would get very moody. He would start like getting like, oh, I don't care, and just completely his what do you call it? His character has just changed completely. Turned into, the Snickers commercials. Hungry when you're you, like that exactly. He would turn like that, and there was this one time where we were with a different set of people that we knew, and it was 3, and he was starting to act like that, and then everyone's kind of like, hey, what's this problem and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, it's because when it's 3 o'clock, it gets like that. So. But those are characteristics that you know from someone because you interact with them and you're closer to them. But not everyone's gonna know that, right? And even though now he's, like I say, he's gotten better at it, but everybody kind of still clowns him on it. Like, oh, it's 3 o'clock. He has to eat, or, And so now he's better at it. But it's funny because now everyone kind of jokes with him about it, like, oh, is it gonna be 3? Has he ate? Or it's 4, and he's like, oh, he has an A, and he kind of laughs about it now, but. Like I said, when you're with someone like close and stuff, you kind of know what their ups and downs are, or what their good habits and bad habits are. But like to the general like public, you can kind of say they don't understand that. So I'm just using this for example. Let's say you're going to a wedding, and the ceremony is at 3, and the food is at 5. So for this guy, that means that at 3, for the whole ceremony he was gonna be all moody and everything. And the whole people were going to be like, oh, this guy, what's his problem? He's a bad person because he came to the wedding. Look how he's acting up. But, we know that because it's 3 and he has a name, so he's acting like that. But not everyone knows that. So, going back to like how we perceive each other, like I said, we have different characteristics, different flaws. But, sometimes when, for example, that at 3 let's say we would get mad because we're hungry. Let's try to read the room, read the environment. Like, hey, right now it's not time to eat, or we're traveling, it doesn't work. So let's try to act differently and behave differently instead of just throwing like a tantrum, because like I said, at the end of the day, how people perceive you, it's going to go a long way. You can be like at work and, eventually you change jobs and stuff like that. So, there's some places, some environments where, it doesn't matter too much in a sense, but like there is some like places, and let's say if you're with with family members visiting, or you're with your significant other's family and stuff like that, and you act a certain way, that's how they're all going to perceive you as like, oh, why are you with this guy if he's acting like that, or why are you with her, look how she's behaving. But if instead you should have taken a step back and considered the position you're in, consider the environment you're in, and maybe not have taken that sort of attitude. You guys catch my drift? Yeah. So, in going back to what I was saying about this verse, how it says that Abraham, Abraham considers this individual a great man. So, let's maybe let's tone it down a bit because obviously Abraham's not with us no more. But maybe with our parents, like our parents feeling proud of us, our parents. Are they someone that they can consider us as, great children or, good children? Like all this is, because how many times I'm pretty sure you guys have seen or heard maybe with individuals who say that their parents have never told them that they were good, or they cared about them or loved them, or any sort of appraisal. And then there's some people that got too much of the appraise, and then they ended up being like spoiled people with attitude and feel like they're in what do you call that word? When they're entitled to everything. So, obviously, here as Christians, we try to do the best we can to do everything the right way, the correct way, especially with our parents. And, like I said, growing up, like in middle school, high school, elementary, when you're still very under the, your parents' supervision, try to do the best you can to, make your parents proud. I mean, what's the most common thing, when people, once you graduate high school, the most common thing is that you hear parents or people say, oh, my son's going to be a doctor. Oh, my son's going to be a lawyer. My daughter is going to be, CEO. So, the parents want their children to, succeed and be better people. And, unfortunately, sometimes, I hear stories from parents saying that, oh, yeah, he or her were doing really good at school, but then they started hanging out with the wrong crowd, and then they just dropped out of school, and now they're just, doing this and doing that. And, when you hear the parents talk about that, they feel to a certain extent pretty, sad about it. They feel kind of like they failed in a way, especially if they did what as best as they could to try to provide for their children to be successful, and seeing that their struggle, their hard work, and their effort, sadly enough, kind of went in vain because, their children didn't really pursue what they were deemed to pursue because of their lack of maybe, discipline, or maybe they fell short at that moment. But during that time, you can see the sadness and the kind of disappointment of the parents thinking that they did everything they can to make their children successful. And then also the other way around, where parents, they do what they can and they see that their sons or daughters are successful, then they feel proud, they feel they want to brag to their, coworkers and their relatives, oh, my son's doing that. And kind of, like I said, taking it back and like in a representation with Abraham as like our parents, or, someone that we look up to, seeing that we have kind of made him proud in the sense of, here, school, work. Of course, the main person that we always want to make proud of is God. He's the main one that we want to really think that, this is my children, he's making me feel proud, he's being the best he can to be faithful, he's doing the best he can to be an honest, good Christian. Of course, that's like the main goal, is for God to be proud of us. We want him to be proud of us, and that goes, without saying. But, like I said, kind of breaking it down to like here with Abraham is, do we do the best we can to be better and to be considered, and like in a sense, a great man, or woman. But that's it, just man and woman, nothing else. But kind of, we should always try to be. I think we go through sometimes. We all go through struggles. We all go through certain situations where, kind of makes, like I think I was talking about how last week, how we might be going through something, and then we might have that situation define us, and just because something didn't go as planned, we get mad at like the whole world, and we think that the whole world's against us, and and also obviously depends on the situation. Some could be minor and we make it a big deal, and some can actually be a big deal, and it could be life changing and things like that. So being able, I think, to interpret and to be able to understand that certain situation, how is it going to affect us, not just in our work, careers, relationships, but also in our spirituality. Is this just because maybe you didn't get into this the academy or something, is that gonna, how have you doubts on God, on your faith? It's like, hey, I've been praying, I've been, fasting, I've been doing everything I can, but I didn't get accepted into this academy. So believe it or not, but you'll get some sort of thoughts of remorse, like not just for yourself, but like also, doubt, like, oh, well, maybe why am I praying and doing all these things if, and I'm doing everything correctly and I didn't even get into this. Sometimes, things happen and sometimes we don't understand, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't just use that situation to turn us away from God. But in other ways, think like maybe God has a different plan for us. Maybe God has a better plan for us. But since our thoughts and our futures is very limited to what we believe is correct and to what our understanding, but we don't know that God always has a better plan for us. Always has and our best, he has the best interest in us, and it may not be like we said, like, some sort of career or anything, but for sure spirituality, because he wants us to come home to him, and he knows that maybe we would have taken this step, it would have made us fall even deeper into despair, or maybe it would have turned us away from him. But we don't know that because we only see what we see with our own eyes and what we believe is correctly. And, sometimes, I wish it wasn't like that. I really wish it wasn't like that where, you do everything right, you do everything good, and at the end it still doesn't work out, and because, I would get mad too, I would not want to be in that position either. And even though I'm pretty sure it's happened to us individually in some levels, but we need to do the best we can to, because sometimes it's not just the situation that happens, but how we react to it, And I think that's a big maturity level. How when something happens, how do you react to it? If, for example, let's say if you're like in a social gathering, and maybe someone makes an indirect insult without you really taking the insult. You could either just kind of brush it off and be like, whatever, or you can crash out and make a big scene and, ruin the whole thing. And now everyone's going to remember because you had a crash out because someone made a joke about you. So what are they going to say later on? Oh, don't tell this guy a joke because he can't take a joke. Don't have too much like humor around him because he'll get mad. So, people will start seeing you differently because of that, because of how you reacted to that situation. Then later on, you'll, if something happens and you react maturely and stuff, and, maybe later on, let's say if this individual did that, you can pull them aside and be like, hey, you kind of like what you said, I didn't really kind of like it, but maybe we can work a way around it. Something more like mature in a way. Because people will notice, people do see, people do acknowledge how you act and how you react towards situations, people, and everything like that. And so people will perceive you differently. And like I said, they could either perceive you as like a joke, or they can kind of take it as like, oh, this guy looks like he has some trouble, but he's working on it, or he acted mature about it. You hear those expressions. You probably said them yourself to other people, or people have told you about certain situations. But that's all how people will perceive you in the future. And kind of like, with Abraham, that considered this man to be great. So I'm pretty sure Abraham was keeping an eye on how this individual was acting and reacting and behaving, and to the point where, Abraham was able to consider him a great man. But I'm pretty sure he went through a lot of struggles and a lot of reformation too, to mature. Because sometimes, maturing is going through experiences, but also how you react to those experiences. Because, something like I always tell you guys, how I work with a lot of like older people that have families and children and grandchildren, and how sometimes even they act immature. Me thinking like, oh, this person must be really wise, he has gray hairs, he must be a really wise person, he has grandchildren, family, and this, he should know what he's doing. But no, sometimes they don't know what they're doing. And it's not to belittle anyone or anything like that, but just to be able to understand that just because you're older, not automatically means that you're mature and you're wise and anything like that. Even though that's kind of how it technically should work, but it's not always the case. Another quick story, another individual is that she had a vehicle, right? Normal vehicle, worked fine, an SUV, and she got a raise. So she's like, I'm going to get a new vehicle. And I remember me and my brother telling her, like, oh, you probably shouldn't. I mean, is there anything wrong with it or the one that you have? And it wasn't even like a bad vehicle, like a 2014 GMC SUV. So it wasn't like a bad looking car or nothing. And she was like, no, well, I just want something new because I got a raise. And I was like, well, I mean, you shouldn't do that. But she's like, well, I'm going to do it. I've been working. He said, all right, do what you want. So she got a Jeep, a newer Jeep, lifted and all this stuff. She had it for a few months. I guess she went on a trip to Vegas and it broke down. And she came back and told us, oh, the Jeep broke down. I'm not going to want it anymore, so I'm going to turn it in. And so she turned it in and got an SUV, a Nissan SUV. And she was driving it for a while. She crashed. Nothing crazy, but she crashed, got into like I think the whole bumper messed up. Maybe nothing mechanically, but the point is that she crashed. She got it fixed. And then she was driving it. She's like, oh, I don't want this car no more. It's crashed and this and that. So I'm going to get another car. So she turned that one in and got a newer car. And so I think now she has a Toyota. I think it's a RAV4. And we were like, what are you doing, and this lady is older, has children and everything. And we're like, and I remember my brother would always talk, would be like, this person is supposed to be like, oh, I know this and know that. And look at all these rookie mistakes that she's doing, because I mean, if you guys understand, when you get a car and then you turn it in, you still got to pay whatever you owed from the other car. So that means that she owes payments from like 3 different cars. And not too long ago, she kind of had like a little crash out, as they say, because she was kind of like, oh, I had to take off money from my 401k to pay off this, to pay off this car and this. And we're kind of like, well, remember, we don't want to be that guy, but remember how a while back we told you, like, you shouldn't do that? She's like, well, yeah, but, I was excited and this and that. Like, well, now you're kind of paying the consequences. And, yeah, she's struggling. She is struggling. She has a lot of issues at work and stuff, but she's like, well, I need to work because I need to pay for all this debt that I have now. So it's kind of like, yeah, that wasn't the best decisions you did. And going back to what I said, how sometimes, people that are older, you might think that and I always kind of bring this up too, that you might think that they know everything, but they don't. But what I'm trying to get at is that let's us not get to that point where we're older and we don't know what we're doing, because I feel like that's kind of like the point of us going to camps and, services and having people to talk to and stuff like that. So when we get older, we don't get to that point where, like me and my brother saw, like, this lady at that point, she should kind of know not to do that. But she choose to just ignore it instead of just, and I'm not saying like, oh, follow our, advice and everything, which, she probably should have, but I'm not saying that, like we always have all the right answers or anything like that. No, but, not for us as we get older, get to that point where we do not know things or understand things. And we do a lot of mistakes when we were younger, like right now. You guys could ask and take, get advice, ask for advice, I know a lot of people that sometimes they'll ask my dad or anything for, hey, what do you think of this or what do you think of that? Trying to, get the kind of like a different understanding, than yourself. Because with yourself, you're just looking at yourself in the sense like, well, it's going to work out for me. It's going to be better for me. I feel like it's better for me. But, sometimes, that's how we feel. That doesn't mean that's always the right choice. So, that's the point of when, you guys having the opportunity to ask for advice. So when you get older, you don't do, as they say, the rookie mistakes, Yeah, even though, there's so many people that you try to still kind of talk to and, kind of. And I think that's also kind of an issue maybe with older people is how sometimes, someone that young that knows what they're talking about will try to explain or try to tell them something. And what's always the common thing, like, oh, what do you know? You're young. Oh, what do you know? You have no life experience. But, there's certain things that you don't need life experience. For example, for the car thing, like you don't need life experience to understand that once every car that you return and take out, it's going to add to debt. You can literally look that up online and figure it out in 5 minutes. It's not something that you learn over time. Nowadays, maybe back then when there wasn't as much, access to internet and to things like that, of course, but, back then you could also ask, So there's always a way or a form, even though sometimes it may not be as quick and easy, but there's always a way to understand and know a situation and, be able to read it better. Because like I said, that's kind of like the point of us, having these youth gatherings, and not just here, but in camps and things like that, to try to be better. So as we're growing up, we don't do the same mistakes, And some could be easier, some could be big, some could be like big mortgage, house, things that you do. And, you take out a loan and you got to pay like 20% interest, and man, you're cooked after that. 20% interest, yeah, you're done. So being able to understand those things, so as you guys get older, you guys don't do like the same mistakes. And I feel like that's kind of like what we're trying to do. We always try to help or, be able to give you guys the opportunity to ask. And, we try to give our experiences with people and individuals and how, maybe even us, when we mess up, try to give you guys the opportunity to be like, hey, don't do it like this, don't do it like that. Because, at the end of the day, well, the whole point of us is to, be with God, be able to be at the end and be like, hey, God, I did what I could, I was honest, I walked as a Christian as best as I could. We want to win, in other words, not just in the, as they say, the worldly sense of careers, financials, family, house, all that stuff, We don't just want to win there, but we also want to win, spiritually. And I feel like towards the end, sometimes a lot of us will have like a very basic, let's say not even with reading, even with like fasting, there'll be days where we just go a day with like average. We don't really even read. We don't fast. We don't even pray. And that's just, let's just say spiritually, even in the sense of like the secular, we could say, you don't even put no effort into your work. You don't put no effort into maybe your relationship. You don't put no effort into schoolwork. And, you don't do anything, in other words, you're not just in the secular sense of job and school and stuff like that, but also in your spiritual sense. You don't pray, you don't read, you don't do anything. You just go to and then at the end of the day, you go to sleep without a care in the world, as they say. Like, oh, I didn't do nothing wrong. Like kind of like a baby that does not know what's gonna happen tomorrow. Because they're babies. And you should know that, hey, you know what? I need to maybe, if I want to get this job or if I want to succeed in this career, I got to study and stay up late. It happens, you have to make sacrifices, stay up late. You got to, if you, hey, you want to, especially if you want to like start a company or start a business, you put in long hours, you put in a lot of time. And sometimes, we're just lazy, like, hey, well, I'll just do it tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes another tomorrow, and at the end, sometimes you don't even get it done. And knowing that, like I said, kind of going to sleep after an average day where you didn't even do anything, and there's someone out there that's working harder than you. There's always someone out there who's being better than you, in the sense of school, work, even spiritually. There's someone that's praying. There's someone that's fasting. There's someone that's, reading the word. There's always someone that's doing more than you are. I mean, more than me, especially, like there's always someone doing better than you. So, when you go to sleep, like, was my day just like any average person out there, any other human roaming this earth type of day, or did I actually, try to do something? Hey, I've been trying to get this job, but I've been too lazy to do an application. Hey, well, do the application, fill it out. And sometimes you might not understand everything, but, ask for help. Don't just be like a sitting duck, as they say, and like, oh, I don't know what to do. Actually, put in the work. Some days, let's say with school, I gotta study, I gotta do this. Well, study. Like the work is I feel like a lot of the stuff that we don't do is because we don't put in any work into it. And yes, there's things like I think I'd mentioned the week before how there's things that take time that require patience. I always mention, like working out in gym, stuff like that. Just because you go to a week in the gym, that doesn't mean you're gonna get a six-pack and everything. I wish, I wish it was like that, but it's not like that. That's something that takes time, but it takes time, it takes discipline, it takes consideration of like, everything you're doing, you're gonna have to change and be consistent, be consistent. And then if you do everything correctly, you'll start seeing the results. That's something that takes more of time and patience. But that doesn't mean that each day you're not going to be putting in the work. You might not, for example, very different from, I'm going to do this application today and turn it in, and hopefully I get the answer within the next day or so. That's a different type of work than, trying to build a business and looking up information, doing all these things. You're not going to build a business. The common phrase, Rome wasn't built in a day. So, there's for big projects and stuff like that, yes, you're going to have to put in work in the long run. But every single day, it's going to be, a stepping stone. You got to be doing something at least every single day, even though some days it might seem like you're not doing anything and you might get, kind of desperate, like, oh, I don't hear anything, I don't see anything. But some things take time. But as long as you're actually putting in the work, you're actually doing something, in the long run, it's gonna work out. And like I said, there's also short-term things like, studying. You have a test in a couple days, study hard those 2 days. You might not sleep or whatever, but at the end of those 2 days, for your test, you will be able to pass it. So there's different types of work ethics for different situations. And like I said, going back to what Abraham saw this man to be great. So us, going through all these different situations, different work ethics, being able to understand, when to put in more work, when to, there's always those things, work smarter, not harder, but be able to understand when to do that. There's a lot of different situations that we can imply these things, working hard or working smart, And I mean, even though sometimes I do also see that people, just because they're intelligent doesn't mean they're smart. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, they might be book smart, they might, even in the Bible, they might know a lot of verses, they might know like a lot of stuff of the Bible by memory and stuff like that, but they're very egotistical. Like they're intelligent from here, but they're not smart on how to use this intelligence and to implement it out there being egotistical, being, oh, I know it all. Oh, I'm more spiritual than you guys are because I know more verses or because I've done this and done that. Yeah, you might be intelligent in knowing the word by word, but you're not smart in how to implement it. And you kind of see what I mean. It could be you could put that like in other things. So being able to understand and differentiate where to use what God has given you in certain situations, certain environments, decision making, relationships, everything that roams our daily life here on this planet, as they say. But with that, hopefully you guys get a little push, and maybe every day instead of making it an average day that anyone can do, make each day count. Make each day have it like some sort of what do you call it, a value. Like, hey, there's a saying that says the hardest day was yesterday, but was it really? Like, did that day, did you really put in that effort? Did you really put in that work? Did you really try to make this work? Or were you just like any other average day that you just did whatever, the bare minimum? You go to sleep like a baby, not even, which I'm not saying I like sleeping like a baby, but I'm going based on the sense that you just go to sleep without a care in the world that, tomorrow, I mean, the baby's doesn't understand that tomorrow they're going to wake up or not, it's a baby, they don't understand. So, going to sleep like that and knowing that you could have done something, but you didn't, you just went and slept and you were just like any other average person out there, And like I said, I'm implementing it spiritually and also, in the school or work or stuff outside of church. So hopefully, you guys today don't go to sleep like as an average person, At least have something going on, something, because, time flies by. And like how my dad was saying earlier, that for some reason, and I always kind of been talking about this lately, that I mean, I don't know about me, but I'm pretty sure you guys also see how time just keeps on, it's just going by quicker. I look at it, we're already in August, next week is going to be half of August. The time is just flying by, and time waits for nobody. And hopefully, time doesn't catch up to us, that, hopefully nothing bad happens to us, but how sometimes usually like if there's an accident or something happens to you and then you want to do everything, or, or when you're sick, I mean, it's happened to me where I'm sick. And then like, oh, if I wasn't sick, I'd be doing this, I'd be doing that. But then you're not sick and you don't do that, Like, let's not wait for something to happen to start acting, And like I said, with school, with work, but also spiritually, let's keep on not making every day average with like our spiritual sense, more like, reading, praying, and fasting every other day, because I can't say fasting every day because then you die, Because I know someone out there is going to be like, oh, the brother said not make a everyday average, so I'm going to fast every day. Well, you're going to die, man, So, there's some people out there who take it like that. So, I gotta make sure everyone understands. But, yeah, exactly, probably would. So we can stand up and do a quick prayer. Thank you, God, for this blessed day. Thank you for the morning service, that you're able to speak through us, Lord Jesus. And also thank you today, Lord, for being able to give us the opportunity to be here. Help us, Lord, to be able to understand what your plan for us is. Help us to be able to put in the work and to not be lazy, Lord Jesus. Help us to read, search for you, and ask for you, and be able to ask for guidance, not just for ourselves, but for other people, Lord, be able to be a torch of light, to be able to lead and guide other people into your will and your light, Lord Jesus. In your holy name we pray, amen.